My name is Diane, I'm 38 years old, and the day my parents called to tell me they were moving in with my sister, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a spreadsheet open on my laptop that showed 14 years of bank transfers, every single one of them going in one direction, from my account to theirs. $247,000 over 14 years. Holidays I didn't take, apartments I didn't upgrade, clothes I didn't buy, a life I put on hold because every time I tried to build something for myself, the phone rang and it was my mother's voice telling me they needed help again. I closed the laptop, I made myself a cup of tea, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel in that moment, relief, because I had been waiting for this. I had known for a long time that this was where the story was going, and I had spent the last 2 years making sure I was ready when it arrived. This is what happened before that phone call, and what happened after. If you've ever been the one who shows up, the one who answers, the one whose name only gets called when something needs to be fixed, and you've watched someone else get the love that should have been yours, stay with me. Subscribe to Unspoken Truth, because these are the stories that don't get told at family dinners, and you deserve to hear them. I grew up in a small house in Akron, Ohio, the kind of house where the walls were thin enough that you could hear every argument and every silence, and in our house the silences were worse than the arguments. My father, Gerald, worked in logistics for 22 years until his back gave out. My mother, Ruth, had worked part-time at a dry cleaner until I was 12 and then stopped working entirely, and my sister Becca was born when I was 7 years old, small and loud and immediately the center of everything. I want to be careful here. I don't want to tell you that Becca was a bad person, because she wasn't. She was just a person who had been handed a role from birth and had simply grown into it the way people do when no one ever asks them to be anything different. Becca was the pretty one, the charming one, the one who made my parents laugh, the one my father called his sunshine, the one my mother dressed carefully for church while I ironed my own clothes in the kitchen. I was the responsible one, which is a word that sounds like a compliment and functions like a life sentence. By the time I was 15 I was helping my mother balance the checkbook because she said numbers gave her headaches. By 16 I was the one who called the insurance company when my father had his first back procedure. By 17 I had a part-time job at a pharmacy and was quietly covering grocery runs when the money ran thin at the end of the month. I didn't do any of this because anyone asked me to. I did it because someone had to, and I was the kind of person who couldn't watch something go unfixed without trying to fix it. That was my particular flaw, the one that would cost me more than I understood at the time. Becca, meanwhile, was in the school play. Becca was at sleepovers. Becca was being driven to dance lessons by my mother on Saturday mornings while I worked. And when Becca came home with a B- on her report card, my parents took her out for ice cream to cheer her up. I remember this specifically because I had come home the same week with a full scholarship offer to Ohio State and my mother had said "That's wonderful, honey," and gone back to watching television. I kept the scholarship letter in a shoebox under my bed for 3 years. I don't know why. I think I needed it to be real somewhere even if it wasn't real in that house. I left for Columbus at 18 and I want to tell you that leaving felt like freedom, but the truth is it felt like guilt wearing freedom's clothes. I called home every Sunday. I sent money when I could, which in my first year of college wasn't much but it was something. $20 here, $40 there, folded into an envelope with a note because my mother didn't trust electronic transfers. I studied accounting, graduated in 4 years with honors, got a job at a mid-size firm in Columbus, and began building a life that was entirely mine for the first time. A small apartment with a blue couch I had chosen myself. A plant on the windowsill. A routine that belonged to no one but me. I was 23 years old and I felt like I had escaped something without fully understanding what it was I had escaped from. Then my father's back gave out completely, surgery, recovery, reduced hours, and the phone calls changed in frequency and in weight. My mother's voice took on a particular quality during those calls, not asking exactly, never quite asking, just describing, just letting the picture form until the silence at the end of the sentence was so full that filling it felt like the only human thing to do. "We're just not sure how we're going to manage the heating bill this month, Diane. Your father's hours have been cut again." I sent $400. I told myself it was temporary. That was the first transfer in the spreadsheet, December 14th, 15 years ago. I remember the date because it was 3 days before my office Christmas party and I didn't go because I had already spent what I'd set aside for the dress. Over the next few years the transfers became regular, not always the same amount, not always for the same reason. Sometimes it was a medical bill. Sometimes it was the car. Once it was bail money for a cousin whose name I had barely heard before that phone call, and each time I sent what was needed because each time it was a crisis and I was the one with a stable income and a spreadsheet and the particular psychological inability to say no to people who needed something, especially when those people were my parents and the need felt real. What I didn't understand for a long time was that the need had become structural. It had stopped being an emergency and become an expectation, and expectations don't announce themselves. They just quietly become the shape of your life until one day you look up and realize that your life has been built around someone else's needs for so long that you're not entirely sure what yours look like. Becca, during all of this, was living in Nashville. She had moved there at 22 with a boyfriend who played guitar. The boyfriend had lasted 8 months and Becca had stayed. She worked at a boutique. She had a group of friends she posted photos with. She called my parents on their birthdays and at Christmas and occasionally in between. And when she called, my mother's voice changed in a way that it never changed when I called. It became lighter, warmer. It became the voice of someone who had just stepped into the sun. I noticed this for years before I let myself understand what it meant. The understanding came on a Sunday in March when I called home and my mother spent 45 minutes telling me about Becca's new apartment in East Nashville. The exposed brick, the original hardwood floors, the little coffee shop on the corner where Becca went every morning, and then said, almost as an afterthought, "Oh, and thank you for the check last month. Your father's prescription is covered now," before moving seamlessly back to the exposed brick. I sat on my blue couch after that call and looked at my plant on the windowsill and thought, she doesn't even know what the prescription was for. I looked it up in my records. It had been a $60 copay for his blood pressure medication. I had sent $200 to make sure they had enough for groceries too. And it had been mentioned in the same breath as Becca's hardwood floors, weighted identically, filed under the same category of minor updates, and then set aside. That night I opened a new spreadsheet and I started going back through my bank records. I wasn't angry yet. I was something quieter than angry. I was curious. I wanted to see the shape of what I had been doing, laid out in numbers, because numbers don't have feelings and I needed something in that moment that didn't have feelings. The total, when I finished, was $189,000, that was 3 years ago. It's $247,000 now. I want to tell you about the trip to Akron in the summer of my 34th year, because it was the trip where something shifted in me permanently. The kind of shift that doesn't make noise when it happens but changes the direction of everything that comes after. I had driven up for my father's birthday, a Saturday in July, hot and flat the way Ohio gets in summer, the kind of heat that makes the air above the road shimmer. I had brought a card, a gift, and a check for $500 because my mother had mentioned on the phone that the air conditioning unit was struggling. Becca had flown in from Nashville. This was rare enough that my mother had mentioned it 4 times in the preceding 2 weeks. Becca is coming. Can you believe it? Your sister is flying in. I've already made her favorite. I want to make sure the house is nice. I arrived on Friday evening to a house that smelled like my mother's pot roast, the good one she made for special occasions. The table was set with the good dishes, the ones that usually stayed in the cabinet, and there were flowers on the table, actual flowers in a vase, which I had never once seen on that table in 34 years of visiting. Becca arrived on Saturday morning and the house changed when she walked in. My father stood up from his chair, which he rarely did because of his back. My mother made a sound I can only describe as joy, pure and uncomplicated, and Becca moved through the house like someone returning to a place that had been waiting for her, easy and warm and completely at home. I had been there since Friday evening. I had helped my mother with the cooking. I had fixed the screen door that had been sticking since April. I had gone to the pharmacy to pick up my father's medications so he wouldn't have to drive, and when Becca walked in on Saturday morning my mother said there she is, as if the party could finally begin. We sat down to lunch and my father raised his glass and said he wanted to say something, and what he said was, "Having both my girls here is the greatest gift I could ask for. Becca, you came all this way and it means the world to me." And he looked at Becca when he said it, just at Becca. And Becca smiled the smile of someone who has always known she is loved without condition. I looked at my fork. I thought about the screen door, the pharmacy, the pot roast I had helped prepare since 7 that morning, the $500 check in my purse, the $189,000 in the spreadsheet on my laptop at home. I thought about the scholarship letter in the shoebox. I excused myself and went to the bathroom and stood at the sink and ran cold water over my wrists the way my grandmother had taught me when I was small and needed to calm down, and I looked at myself in the mirror and I thought, clearly and without drama, this is the last time I do this without a plan. The plan took 2 years. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't fast and it wasn't clean and there were months where I questioned whether I was being cold or calculating or something worse. And then I would open the spreadsheet and look at the number and remember the fork and the flowers and my father's eyes finding Becca's face across the table, and I would close the spreadsheet and keep going. The first thing I did was stop sending money without being asked directly. This sounds simple and it was one of the hardest things I have ever done, because the calls kept coming with their particular shape. The description without the request. The silence at the end of the sentence. And I had to learn to let the silence sit there unfilled. To say I'm sorry things are tight right now and then stay quiet while my heart rate climbed and my mother's voice did what it did when she was disappointed. The second thing I did was start building something that was entirely mine. I had been at the same firm for 11 years. I was good at my job. I had clients who trusted me specifically, and I had been offered a partnership track twice and turned it down both times because the timing had never felt right, meaning the needs of other people had always felt more urgent than my own ambitions. I accepted the third offer. The third thing I did was buy an apartment, not rent, buy. A 2-bedroom in a building I loved with a view I had wanted for years and a mortgage that was entirely in my name. I furnished it slowly and deliberately, every piece chosen because I wanted it. A dining table that seated 6, bookshelves that covered an entire wall, a kitchen with enough counter space to actually cook in. I spent one Saturday afternoon arranging my spice rack and then stood back and looked at it and felt something so unfamiliar it took me a moment to name it. I felt like a person whose life belonged to her. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was at my desk, coffee in hand. The good coffee I had started buying for myself when I stopped sending the grocery money. My mother's name on the screen. We've been talking, Diane, your father and I, and we think it makes more sense for us to move in with Becca. Nashville is warmer and she has the space and she's been asking us to come for years. We just wanted to let you know. I set my coffee down, I looked out the window at the city, at the particular gray of an October morning in Columbus, and I waited for the feeling I expected, the hurt, the rejection, the old familiar ache of being the other daughter, and it came. I won't pretend it didn't, it moved through me like a cold current and I let it, and then it passed, and underneath it was something I hadn't expected. Steadiness, solid and quiet, the steadiness of someone who had known this was coming and had built accordingly. That's great, Mom, I said. I hope it works out really well for all of you. A pause, she had expected something different. You're not upset? I thought about 14 years of bank transfers, about the screen door, the pharmacy, the flowers that had appeared for Becca and never for me, about 2 years of quiet deliberate building while no one was watching. I'm genuinely happy for you, I said, and I meant it, not because it didn't hurt, but because I had built a life that didn't depend on their approval anymore, and that was worth more than any amount of hurt. They moved to Nashville in January. Becca welcomed them with the warmth she had always had, and I have no doubt she meant it. Becca had never been cruel, she had simply been given something I hadn't been given and had no reason to question it. 3 months after the move my mother called again, her voice different this time, thinner, with an edge of something she wasn't quite saying. It's a lot, Diane, having them here. Becca hadn't expected how much day-to-day care your father needs, and the finances are tighter than we thought. I listened, I let her talk. I let the silence at the end of the sentence form and sit there, and then I said, I understand, Mom, that sounds really hard. I hope you all figure it out together. She waited. I didn't fill it. We said goodbye and I sat at my dining table, the one that seated 6, and I opened my laptop, not the spreadsheet, a new document, and I started writing down what I wanted the next 5 years of my life to look like, just mine. No transfers, no emergencies, no phone calls that rearranged my budget before I'd finished reading them. I wrote for 2 hours and when I was done I made dinner, something slow and good that filled the apartment with warmth, and I ate at my table by the window with a glass of wine in the city outside going about its evening, and I thought about the scholarship letter in the shoebox, and I thought, better late than never, Diane, better late than never. I still talk to my mother, I still talk to Becca. Things are different now in the way that things become different when the invisible architecture of a relationship is finally named. My mother is learning, slowly and imperfectly, that I am a person with limits and not a resource with a phone number. My father said something to me last Christmas that I will keep for a long time. He called me on a weekday afternoon. No occasion, just called, and he said I've been thinking about how hard you worked. All those years. I don't think I ever said thank you, and his voice was old in a way that made me understand he meant it. I told him it meant a lot to hear that, because it did. Some things come late and still count. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in it, if you are the one who shows up, the one who fixes things, the one whose name gets called when something is broken and gets forgotten when something is celebrated, I want you to hear something clearly. Being dependable is not the same as being loved, and being needed is not the same as being valued. You are allowed to know the difference. You are allowed to stop filling silences that were never yours to fill. You are allowed to build something that belongs entirely to you. You are allowed to let the people who took you for granted figure out what that actually means without your help. The most radical thing I ever did was not confronting my parents. It was not sending the spreadsheet. It was not the dramatic moment at the table that I had imagined 100 times. It was sitting alone in a bathroom in Akron, Ohio, running cold water over my wrists, and deciding quietly, without witnesses, that I was going to matter to myself even if I never mattered to them the way I needed to. That decision didn't fix everything. It didn't rewrite 14 years. It didn't give me back the holidays or the apartment upgrades or the dress I didn't buy for the Christmas party. But it gave me something that no transfer could ever have purchased. It gave me a life that was mine, shaped around my choices, answering to my name. My name is Diane, I'm 38 years old, and my dining table seats 6. I've never once eaten alone at it and felt lonely. Thank you for listening, take care of yourself, and if no one has told you lately that your effort matters, I'm telling you now.